Good evening, everyone. My name's Mick and I am an alcoholic. Welcome to the Canarian International Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am serving as your secretary tonight. Please join me in a moment's silence to remember the still suffering alcoholic, both inside and outside this meeting. I've asked Ali J to read the preamble.
Hi, my name's Ali and I'm an alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. AA has no dues or fees. It is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. A very warm welcome goes out to any newcomers or anyone returning to Alcoholics Anonymous. The chat is now disabled until the end of the meeting, except for the meeting's host. And the speaker tonight is E.S.H, and he will share his story with us. Over to you, Peter.
That was very quick. Unmuted, am I?
Yeah, you're unmuted.
Okay. My name is Peter. I'm an alcoholic, and through the grace of God and the fellowship of AA, I am sober today. 1,219. No, 12,918 days. I wasn't ever going to say that, but I'm reading a good old timers book at the moment in Dr. Bob's story, and he was very fond, apparently, of repeating that he was so many days and months and years so sober. And I says, well, if he can do it, I can do it. You know? So that's basically that. I'm from Donegal here in Ireland, and when I grew up in a very happy family in my family. So I'm one of a family of 8, and as I was growing up, with a father who worked very hard in his own business, and my mother had a shop in the town, a small town of 2,000 people. And I had a very good upbringing, very Catholic upbringing, actually. Did the altar boy and all that stuff. There was power for the course as I grew up in that family. Unfortunately, at one point, I was abused by a man in the town, and I found it a big secret, and it was a difficult time for me at the time because it was both exciting and it was also abuse for me. So that may or may not have brought me to the place of alcoholism. I have no idea, but I dealt with it as I did the 12 steps. I've dealt with it over the years, and I'm fine with it. I pray for that man. I couldn't tell my parents, of course, that it was happening. I was 9 years old, 10 years old, and it was a time for a young mind to be destroyed. And so what happened basically with me was my trust from then on was gone for everybody, and everything was secretive, and everything, if there was a bit of excitement in it, I would chase a bit of excitement, but always very secretly and always with distrust. So I was learned how to sort of handle situations quite a bit as a child growing up. At the age of 13 or 14, I was working in the local hotel in the bar, helping out there. I ended up doing bartending there, and I was just thinking of things that I would be sharing here today, and I was thinking, geez, one of the things I did was working in the bar. The owner of the hotel came to me one day and he says, all the local lads, there's a few local lads there, 5 or 6 of them, and they're constantly sitting at the bar. It was a bit like Cheers, that program, and they were, I won't say what their careers were, but they were professional men that were sitting in the bar well after hours, and I used to serve them drink. And I remember distinctly the owner of the hotel coming to me and saying, he said, if any of those men ever need to have a drink and they're shaking so much, he says, you're obliged, as the bartender to steady their hand, hold their hand. Now, I was 12, 13, I was 14 years about in age. And I was always watching the lads who would stay back in the bar late at night to see who was going to be shaking too much, So I was conscious, and also in a small town, there were alcoholics, of course, and there were alcoholics who found meetings in AA. And there were most of them because of the small community talking that, oh, there goes Joe and there goes Mary, they're going up to Derry, which was a local, the city up above Donegal, where they went to the meetings. And they might get 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, but then you'd see them staggering around the town, And there was all that talk going on. So I was conscious of drunkenness. I was conscious of AA in that way. And I also had two cousins. One was a doctor and the other was a policeman. Both of them were in AA for many, many, many years. Both of them did over 40 years in sobriety. And one of them still alive, actually, and he's 50 years sober. And my father used to speak very, very highly of him, of both of them. And it was something as a child growing up, I wanted approval from my father. But unfortunately, I was one of 8, and my oldest brother was delegated to explain everything to us. My father would turn to him and he'd say, you just listen to your big brother there. My father was very busy working, and he always I was looking for his approval and I didn't get it. I was told to, basically shut up and listen, and that obviously affected my personality and my development, But I always sat up when I heard him talking about my two cousins that were in AA. He had great admiration for them, And sadly, when he died, my mother actually gave me the little just for today that was in his wallet, and it was wrapped up in sellotape, covered in sellotape to protect it. And my mother found it in his wallet. Now, my father had not gone to AA, and he was very fond of a drink. In fact, his last years of drinking, when he retired at the age of, he died at 74, 68, he retired and gave the business over to one of my brothers, and it was a very good business. And he worked very hard at it. He had 5 or 6 sibling brothers, and we used to literally, my mother had a little shop in the town, and next door to it was a pub, and guess what the name of it was? The Step In. The Step In. And the brothers used to all meet in there at 6 o'clock in the evening, and at 7 o'clock that evening they depart and go for their tea. They drank regularly, but not madly, not addictively, if you like. But my father, at the age of 68, when he did retire, he took to the bedroom in the back of the house. It was a fine house looking out in the sea, and he took to the back bedroom in the house with a single bed in it, and he had a crate of Guinness and a bottle of Blackbush from the age of 68 to the age of 74 when he died from alcoholism. He was dribbling and dribbling. My mother was changing his trousers every day. It was awful. And I used to go up to the bedroom occasionally because I was away. And when I'd come home, I'd smoke a joint and I'd go up and I'd sit in the bed talking to him. And I felt that I was the only person that could talk to him, drinking and drugging. And I'd be sitting there waffling away to him. And he'd come back down and say, yeah, it's grand, I didn't see it for what it was really worth to me and what I became an alcoholic. Progressively, when I was that bartender, I used to drink in the bar. There was a drink called Advocat, and it was a yellow egg based drink with that vodka in it, I believe. I'm not even quite sure. And I used to drink that just like sweets, eating sweets. And I used to feel good on it, but it never really knew that I was getting drunk on it or anything or high. I was running around the place very happy and cheerful. And that was my introduction to drink, basically. And then I went to boarding school. And when I was in boarding school, my first official drink was when a couple of lads came up from my hometown and took me out from the boarding school on a Saturday evening. We were allowed out for a few hours. And one of them was a sailor. He was in the Navy, and he was in his uniform. And he and another little lad from home, the two of them said, "What are you having to drink?" And I said, "Oh, I'll have a Coca-Cola, Fanta, or whatever it was." But they came down with a bottle of beer and put it in front of me, and I drank it, and I didn't like it. Unlike a lot of people I've heard in Norway saying the first drink they got high on it, and they were hooked immediately, and I didn't have that. I drank quite happily because I play a bit of music and sing all that stuff, and in that time, I'd say I got about 12 or 14 years at least of drinking without it being consequentially bad for the people around me or for myself, And then it progressively, as it says, the disease gripped me. And when I got into the grip, I had to go to the early houses to have a drink. I had to have a drink. I had to have a drink at night and in the morning. I did my inventory. I got a sponsor, and I was doing my inventory, and I worked out that I had 22 jobs in 22 years. Strangely enough, 22 different jobs, and in every one of those jobs, I was able to walk away from it before I got fired, and have another job lined up. Only the last job, which was I got a job as a medical rep, I was called up by a beautiful man who hired me in the first place. And in the 3.5 years that I worked in that company, the first year I went off drink altogether to prove to my wife, my family, and everybody that I was okay. And I studied, and I became a very good rep for that company in the first year. And my sales were peaking excellently. He came down, took us out for a meal, and said I was the best rep in the company, which was true. The facts were there. But then slowly but surely, on the anniversary of my first year of not drinking rather, white knuckling it, as I've heard in here, I was sitting up in the bar stool ordering a pint of Guinness and a cigar, because I stopped smoking cigarettes, and I was a chain smoker at the time. I did it for 1 year because my wife had left me, and I was making all the efforts to get back into her life. And at this stage, I had worked my way, I weaved my way back into her life. And when I had landed that job, and I was suited up and booted up and driving a new car and stuff like that, we were back living together after that separation. And that's what I did in that year. But once that year was up, I was sitting in the high stool, and I was back. And that was my big slip. What I did in boarding school, I was a good footballer. I did very well in playing football. Represented the school in playing table tennis. I was a good sportsman. And boarding school, what else do you do? I wasn't academic, but I was certainly a good sportsman. And I believe very much in providence and how things, no coincidences, things are exactly laid out for you. There's a right and a left, and you make the choice. And I was in my summer holidays. I was on my final year in college and in the secondary school, and I was home helping my father gathering potatoes in the field, which he owned. And there was about 8 or 10 people gathering potatoes, all given about, let's say, 100 yards each. It's called a stint. And there was a man in front of me, and he was gathering the spuds. And he was my father's right-hand man. He was a mechanic. He was priceless to my father. But he was in my opinion, a very ignorant man. And he used to walk a bit further and give me a bit longer of a stint every time when we were gathering the potatoes. And I would be left with an extra yard to gather, while the lads all sat up on the bags of potatoes, and they'd be looking and laughing at me and saying, "Oh, you young fellas in school, you can't work, you're useless," and all this stuff, slagging me. And I felt shit, because my father would be driving the tractor, and he'd get off the tractor, come over and help me, and he'd be down on bended knee and back, and they'd be helping me put the potatoes in. They'd be saying, "Don't mind him, son, don't mind him. I need that man, I need that man. So don't mind him, don't mind him. Just keep gathering. Good man, good man." That was my father. Humility, And as he would have it, he did it 3 times, and my father each time got off the tractor and came over and helped me. And I said, "This is not on that. Like, this is your business. This is your." I don't know what I said to him. I just said, "This is not on. You're the boss here, and you can see what he's doing." And he said, "No, son, just keep gathering and say nothing." And then this time I was by myself gathering, and they did it yet again, and my hand went down and I picked up a big rotten spud. And I was pretty damn good shot. I played a lot of handball and stuff in those days, and I fired it and it hit him in the back of the neck. And of course, all hell broke loose. He came racing down, picked me up. He was a big guy, and he hammered into me. And my father yet again, had to jump off the tractor, come over and split us up, And in that moment, he literally was holding the 2 of us, one each side of him. And he looked at us, and I just screamed out. I said, "That guy, Dad, he's just a bastard, a rotten Protestant bastard." And in our town, it was all a Catholic town. There was 3 families that were Protestant. And I said that. Now, my father, absolutely, I couldn't have said worse. I said, "Fucking bastard." And he whacked me in the face. First time ever he hit me, never hit me since. But that was, I had gone extremely far. And I raced out of the field, and I raced down to the town, into the house, through the house, up the stairs, into the room, slamming the doors, crying my eyes out, shouting and roaring. And my mother raced up behind me and says, "What's wrong, what's wrong?" And I said, "Dad's after hitting me. And I was a drama queen. And the more I thought about it, what I would do is I'll go up to Derry and I'll go to a movie and I'll never have to pick spuds again, and I'll come back and everything will be okay. But as it turned out, in those days, when you're hitching, it was 18 miles away to go to the cinema up in Derry. I went down to the bridge and I put my thumb out, and as it would have it, there was a girl, a beautiful girl in a mini, both a mini car and a mini skirt. And she says, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going." "Where are you going?" And she says, "Dublin." I said, "That's where I'm going." And I ended up going down to Dublin with no money in my pocket, not a clue what I was doing, but I was just attracted to this woman and I wanted to get away. I spent 3 weeks down in Dublin. I had a friend that was in school with me in the boarding school who was working in an art agency, an art advertising agency, and we had a little bed sit. And I was able to communicate with him. I found him, and I stayed with him, and I told him it was okay, but don't tell him at home. And in that time, my cousin, who was the art studio director of the agency, came to me and he says, "Pete," he says, "your parents up there sick. What are you doing with yourself?" And I said, "Well, I've finished my college and I'm waiting to try and get into the NCAD, the National College of Art." And he says, "Have you applied?" I said, "I have, but they haven't heard anything back." And he says, "Well, do you know what? On Friday, there's an entrance exam in there." And he says, "You should go and do that." And I said, "But sure, I've nothing, I've no equipment." And he came over the next day with everything, sketchbooks, pencils, paintbrushes, all the paint. And he gave it to me and he says, "Go in and do that." And I went in and did it. And a week later, a message came home to my parents to say that I had won a scholarship into the National College of Art. Now, talk about providence. I mean, what the hell? And my life has been like that from then, honestly. When I went to the art college then, of course, I was introduced to drinking pints and smoking hash and grass, and it just became a real bohemian hippie period of my life, And then I fell in love with a girl, and we went to England together. My wife, today, we're over 53 years married today, and we went to England together for a year, and that was a tough time for us because we got ourselves into difficulty over in England, and came back, and then again I couldn't settle in Ireland, and I took her with me, and we got married actually a day before we went to America on the high recommendation of my aunt, who was a solid Catholic, and said, "You can't go to America without getting married," because we were already living in sin as far as she was concerned. and I had to get married, and they put on a big party for us, and that's all I was interested in, a party. And we ended up getting married. But I did love her. And we went to America, and we lived in Chicago for a year. All that time, I was introduced to more drink, more drugs. In fact, it's only when I came into AA that I discovered, the cure. I would drink Bloody Marys over in America. And I thought this was my breakfast. I was lying in my stomach. I had a great time out there playing music, and I was very, very well received over there. People loved a young couple, the two of us. And my aunt was right. Had we not got married, we wouldn't have stayed married. I have no doubt about that, because I was attracted to all the young ones out there, my age, in the hippie days, love everybody and all that stuff. And my wife the same. But because we were married, people had a bit of respect for us. So it didn't happen. And thankfully it didn't. But then I came back and couldn't settle again in Ireland. And I got a job here, did this, did that. And then I ended up going the blue jean music, blue jeans, hippies, all that stuff. I went to Amsterdam. I brought Vicky with me, my wife. And we ended up over there, and that just turned into a hell of a nightmare. It spiraled into drink and drugs every day, parties, bringing people back to the house at 3:00 in the morning. My daughter was born there in Amsterdam. My wife was doing yoga at the time. She was very, very spiritual. She was very conscientious about her lifestyle, her organic food eating and everything like that. She was very good. And she was having this baby in the house. And I remember distinctly, my drug dealer came into the house for the party that she was going to have the baby, and we had a midwife there. And he said to me, I had no money. I was living in a squat, a house, a crack building, we call it in Amsterdam, because I was robbed all the money we had and all the passports. And I ended up with this drug dealer who had money. And he says, oh, what's the baby going to be? And I said, oh, it's going to be a girl. I've no doubt about it. And he says, well, I think it's going to be a boy. And if it's a boy, if you will take a bet. And I said, what's the bet? And he says, I'll buy everything for a party for you. I was more interested in what sex that baby was that morning when my daughter Lara was born, because I wanted the party, I wanted to win, and I did win. But I didn't, because I continued to drink. And Vicky, after 2.5 years in Amsterdam with the baby, she just picked up the baby and ran, because I was just snorting cocaine, smoking dope, and drinking down in the early house every morning, and coming home with a load of lads and playing guitar and music at 3:00 in the morning. It was crazy lifestyle. And she ran and left me, and she was right. And I came home from Amsterdam 7.5 stone a week in myself, 7.5 stone in weight. And I was absolutely wrecked. I was psychotic. If I looked at somebody and they were wearing gold rimmed glasses, I was full sure they were the devil reincarnate. I was gone with the wind, absolutely shattered. And I was broken-hearted, of course. And I remember my father sent 2 people over to get me. And the first one I dismissed totally. My eldest brother, he came home and he says, no, there's no hope for that lad. Then another man came over to get me and bring me home. And he came around and he packed me into the car, and I had my guitar case and a teddy bear. 2 things are precious. Everything else we just dumped in the house. There wasn't much there anyway. That house, at one point, Vicky, my wife's brother, came over and he was wearing a suit and tie, and he was a businessman doing business, legal business in Amsterdam, because I thought everything was illegal in Amsterdam. And he was there officially in business. And I remember sitting on the floor, stoned out of my head, and I said, help yourself to anything in the fridge there. And he opened the fridge, and honest to God, there was 1 can of Heineken. There was no butter, there was no milk, there was nothing. That's where I brought my beautiful wife to. That's where I brought myself to. I was unaware of my responsibility. I was unaware of my sickness. I remember at one point in that apartment that we had, which was a cracked building, they call it over there, where I had to go and find a place to stay. And upstairs, I remember going upstairs, and there was a bit of a room And I went into that room and I drank myself silly. And I remember getting magazines piled up to the floor and a pair of scissors. And eventually I couldn't even use the scissors. I was just tearing pictures out and sticking them in the wall. And I was saying, when I die, they'll love this. The whole place was a collage of pictures and little sayings. I was crazy. And my wife, nobody came near me. I was up in that room by myself for days on end, like a hermit. It was absolutely, Vicky, of course, was busy minding a child, a baby. It was absolutely crazy. And I remember anyway, I was sitting in the car with this man who was taking me home. And my father had provided a ticket down in Le Havre to get the boat home. I had to get down to Le Havre. That's in France. So this man was going to take me down the following morning, down to the boat, driving me. And I was sitting in the car and I looked over at him. And as I said, I saw the gold rimmed glasses and I freaked. And I jumped out on a green light in the middle of the night, lights, darkness, rain, and I had a guitar and a teddy bear. And I jumped out into a street in Den Haag. I didn't know where the hell I was. And he had to drive on. And I ran down into a subway there. And he came up the other side. And right in front of me, there was a man there with a big knife. And he scared the living daylights out of me because he looked threatening. And I just was palpitating with fear and anxiety. I had tried to kill myself with enough drugs to kill a horse, and it didn't work. And when I came up, there was a big neon sign that says Polici, and I went polite. That's what it means, polite. I knew it was police. And I went in there, and I said, I can't stay out in the streets tonight. I'm lost. I don't know what to do. And they says, come in. Have you your passport? I had my passport. And they stamped the passport and they put me into a room in the cell. And it was all padded and it was all white and it was all ironed and it was all clean. And I got into that bed and I thought I was in heaven. That's how secure I felt. It was awful. And I sat there, I don't know, lying in that bed with one little white sheet over me. And I remember they opened the door, I don't know what time, 7 in the morning, a cup of coffee. They says, off you go now, son. And I went hitching then all the way down to Le Havre. And all the way down, I got down there eventually and I was playing the guitar in different places. I had to stop and I was getting money and I got over to Dublin. Finally, I played on the boat and I made loads of money. It was quite good because I played every day over there. And I got to Dublin and my brother-in-law met me at the boat. And he says, don't you come near our sister, your wife. Back off up to Donegal, you know. And I just looked down and I had no, and he handed me a couple of bob and he says, you're booked into a place in Parnell Square, bed and breakfast for the night. And I went down there and I went up then to up the top of O'Connell Street and there was a queue outside a cinema and I played there and the money flowed into my guitar case. I couldn't believe it. I said, Jesus, what have I been doing over in Amsterdam? This place is great. They're appreciating what I'm doing. And I had loads of money. And then a drunk came down the street and he picked up my guitar case and he fecked it up into the air. All the money all over the street. And I just stood there and I'm going, oh. And everybody got out of the queue and went over and picked up the money and says, you're okay, son. All right, be so. And I was going, God, the people are lovely. They're lovely, you know. And at that point, they all went into the cinema and there was a bouncer on the door next door and it was a nightclub. And he says, hey, there's going to be another queue here now in a minute. So I stayed and I played there and then he invited me into the nightclub and I went into the nightclub. And I walked around stealing everybody's drinks off the table, you know. My pockets were with the money. I still continued to take everybody's leftovers on the drink. And then I came out after it, and the bouncers, there was 2 men there in bow ties and waistcoats and, you know, tuxedos, and they were the bodyguard, whatever they were at the door. And next thing, I'm standing there and they were saying, oh, you're great, man. Jesus, come back tomorrow night. You know, you're great. And I'm standing there, plunk, out of my head, totally for an asylum. And next thing I saw one of them taking a cigarette, and he lit the cigarette, and there was noise in the hall and the porch, and I could see him winking at his friend. And he took the lighter and he put it in the back of my coat, and he lit the back of my coat. I had a corduroy jacket on me. I'll never forget it. And I just stood there looking at myself in the mirror, and I said, that's it. I don't care. I can go to flames now. I'm not going to learn a lesson, but they shouldn't do this. That's the way I was thinking. And then eventually there was so much fire, they put me out. You know. And I went down and I stayed in that guest house, and there was shouting and roaring. My brother-in-law put me into this really rough guest house, and I had to get out of there. There was people banging and shouting and roaring at each other in this place. And I came out of there and I hitched all the way home. And in Northern Ireland there was trouble. I went through in Northern Ireland, and I tell you, my sister said she was a teacher, and she was living in Derry, and she was coming up to meet me somewhere. And I ended up in this very orange area, and I was singing rebel songs on my guitar. And she couldn't believe that I did this, you know. But I was oblivious to consequences. I had no idea of where I was. As I said, I was 7.5 stone, and I wore that coat with a big bone in it as a medal of honor, if you like. I was just nuts. But when I got to the door of my father, my sister took me home. My father came out and he put his arms around me and he said, "Son, you'll be okay." And as it turned out, my son that went missing in Amsterdam, he was the local doctor. He said, and I him. And I put a doctor every second day, and I put injections up my bum to build me up. And God and Mom was so good to me. And I mean, I got to approval then. It was just beautiful. And I got about 6 or 7 weeks of recovery and eating good. And even though I was separated from my wife and daughter, I felt good. And I went up to Mass one Sunday morning, and the priest was up on the altar, and he said, "Is anybody here interested in doing an apprenticeship over in West Donegal? There's a course over there for ankle," which was a government thing. And I immediately thought, Jesus, I'm well now, I'm grand, I could go over now, get it played, I might make something of myself. And I signed up for that. And again, I was in another little mini car with two local lads at a car, and they said they were going to do the course as well. I was only 10 miles away from my hometown when I was in the pub with the lads, and the joint was rolled up, and we were back in the same old bandwagon again. It was absolutely crazy. The things I did, you know, and my wife used to come up in the bus to see us. It was a long trip, but she did 3.5 hours on a bus to come up and see me. And by that time she had come up, I would be shaved and cleaned and suited up and pretending that I was great and I was well and all that. And it was all pretense, you know. And she'd go back home wondering, what the hell, am I mad even considering going back with this guy, you know? But I put on the act. And I got back down to Dublin, and I worked in this place and I worked in that place. As I said, I worked in 22 different jobs. And then I finally got that job. I convinced my wife by staying off the drink and off the drugs and off the cigarettes, smoking, all that stuff, that I was okay. Here I was in a very good job. So I bummed my way back into her life, as I did bummed around the place getting drink. You know, I had learned all the techniques. I knew how to do it. And after a year and a half of that, I slowly but surely lost the job in that company. And meanwhile, my wife was working hard and supporting me, and they asked me to come down here to Galway, the company. And here I was, and then I lost my driving license for drinking. I used to go up to the hotels and I'd call up the doctors and say, "Put me down for a call, will you?" And of course, they knew the company, and they told the company that I was acting the bollocks, you know. So that was what happened to me. And then I was on the dole, the welfare, social welfare system. And my wife supported me. And then this friend of mine, I was very fond of photography while I was doing the medical rep. And in fact, that's how I got fired. One of the reasons I got fired, because my work was published in a magazine under a pseudonym. And my boss was sitting on the desk one day with the magazine, and there was 3 pages of fashion shoots that I had done under a pseudonym. And he says, Peter, your work is very good, but it's not here. That's why he let me go. He says, go off and do that. And I ended up becoming a photographer down here in Galway. But just prior to that, as I was trying to set up a business here and get back into my wife's life and make amends, I had a friend, I was working on a film as a photographer, and this friend who was a musician and he was working on the soundtrack of the film, he came every day. He used to come to me at lunchtime, and 10 minutes to 1, he'd say, I'm off, I'm going down to the Osnum House now. And I used to drink with this guy, and I used to play music, and I used to talk bullshit with him, you know. And here he was drinking coffee and talking sensibly. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. You know, I was attracted to how this man had transformed, and I didn't know how. But he said, I'm going off to a meeting. And he never said, ever did he say, Peter, you should go. You have to go. He just went by attraction, and it worked. Because this morning I woke up in the bed and I heard the urgency in my wife's voice saying, Peter, I want to talk to you. And I was doing the normal down in the pub, coming back home drunk, into the bed and sleeping till 12 o'clock, getting up, showering and going back and holding court in the pub. That's what I did. And this morning she says, I really want to talk to you. And I heard the urgency in her voice, and I got up and I stood in front of her and I looked at her and she said, Peter, I love you, but I don't like you anymore. And I was absolutely offended that how could you not like me? I know you love me. And it was just unbelievable, because I saw in that woman that I love the pain. She looked like an old woman. She was haggard. Her face was ruined with fear, with all the anxiety that I put on her face, you know, over the years. It was awful to be standing there looking at it. But I also saw myself in her face. I saw me being very, very sick. And I remembered my friend who was going to the meetings. And when she went out the door, I dropped to my knees and I said the best prayer in the world. I said, please, God, help me. And whatever happened, when I got up from my knees, I went down to the meetings in Osnum House, and that was 12,918 days ago. I've never looked back. It's been the best journey. I've had the most wonderful recovery. Every day is a learning experience. Every day, you know. When Mossy asked me to do this, I came in at the same time as Mossy. He was about 3 or 4 months ahead of me. And I remember we were good friends in the early days, and it was lovely. It was lovely. And I've had some great friends come and go, some with alcoholism, some with addiction, some who have died, and some who have survived, you know. But I have great friends. And today it's quite ironic, but I was there and I was talking to my good friend Garrett this morning, and I said, oh, I'll tell him I'm going to be recorded on a meeting. I didn't want to, but I wanted to. And then I said, oh, shit, I can't just do this. Garrett was great fun. He's a great friend of mine. And next thing I said, fuck it, I'll send it to a few other people, the meeting. And you know, my phone is full of people that's in the fellowship that I know quite well. Some really close friends. I was 7 years into AA when I was absolutely desperate and suicidal because something from my past came up and scared the living daylights out of me. And I was so fortunate that I had friends in AA that walked up and down the prom either side of me every day for I don't know how many days, but they just said, acceptance, Peter, let go and let God. Acceptance, let go and let God. I couldn't believe it. And I'd come home and I'd read page 449 in the big book, and I'd read acceptance, and it was absolutely really powerful and helped me. And all that is like a distant memory now. It all resolved in God's way, not my way. you know. And I was saying, coming on to this meeting, acronyms. I'm not great. I haven't great retention for things, but I love words, acronyms, and even had to look up the word acronyms. What is it? You know, when somebody says GOD, good orderly direction, gift of desperation, group of drunks, GOD. You know, and I was looking it up. What is that word? Acronyms, and then I went, Acron, Dr. Bob. I'm still crazy after all these years with the little playing of words, you know, and ego, urging God out. I heard that in here, and it sustained me and helped me. I heard the word cunning, powerful, and baffling as a description of alcoholism. But there was always that other word that came in, which was insidious. And for years in AA, I'm talking 4, 5, 6 years, coming regularly to the 3 meetings that was on in Galway at the time, smoke-filled rooms, and laughter, which I was attracted to, kept me coming back every time. And insidious, I kept repeating that. Oh, insidious, inside us. The disease is inside us. You know, I thought it was great. And a long-time member, God bless him, now may he rest in peace, Jack B., he came to me one day and he says, Peter, insidious does not mean inside us. He says, go home and look it up. And I looked it up, and it means ambush. It means, yeah. So I learned to look words up now when I didn't understand them. And I'm doing it to this day. And I find it revealing and helpful to pursue that, you know, to find out where these things are. Like, for instance, when I got myself a sponsor. I did the 4th and 5th step. And I was full of fear doing the 5th step. Who the hell could I trust with all this? You know? And it wasn't easy. First time I did it, I went to a monastery, to monks who they didn't talk. And I was up there writing like mad, and then I came down and I shared it with one of the monks, you know. And he said, you know, that's great now. He says, you've read it to me. And he said, good man, now look after that, take that paper. And there was pages and pages of it. And I went out and I put them around the place in the gardens and burned them, each one, contemplating and meditating. I'm learning to meditate today, you know. Every day is a learning experience for me. This is a learning experience for me, to be able to sit here and be honest, straight with people whom I don't know, but I trust. People who are like-minded, that I know I could sit with and sit here all day, you know, and chat. Because that's what Bill and Bob, that's how it worked for them. And I'm reading Dr. Bob's book at the moment, and he said, it wouldn't matter a damn, he says, if you, Carl Jung and Thomas or somebody, one of the Christian writers, if they all came to me that evening and sat with me, I said, 15 minutes to Anne, my wife. I said, I'm only going to speak to this lad, 15 minutes. And he ended up all evening talking to Dr. Bob, because he talked about his experience. That's what worked for him, you know? And this is what's working for me, to talk to you, to say that sponsorship, going through the 12 steps, has been a great thing for me. A great thing. It relieved me of so much pressure. But when I talk about the acronym of FEAR, FEAR, it's fuck everything and run, or face everything and recover. A much better one. I like to be positive. I like the positiveness of AA. I like the positiveness of the fellowship that we have, you know. It's a positive, to look at the positive side of things. And when I was doing the columns in my inventory, you know, instead of beating myself up with all my guilt trips and shame trips and all that stuff that I did, you know, on the other column, I was able to write something that was half decent about myself, you know? And the humor, I said, if I go in this meeting, I was thinking like, Jesus, as I know, I hate to be asked to do a share except 5 minutes before the meeting, and then I'm grand. But if I'm asked a day before or a week before, I'm in bits because I'm going, oh, I have to say this, I have to say that, I have to say the other. But one thing I did want to say was I was attracted that time I went into the meeting when my wife left me that morning. And I dropped to my knees and said, please, God, help me. And I went into Osnam House because I went into a smoke-filled room and the man up on the top table was sitting there and he says, I'm allergic to drink. And I knew the word allergy because I was a medical rep. And I understood what allergy meant. And straight away I knew. But he proceeded to say, I'm allergic to drink. He says, I break out in spots. You could find me, he says, in Donegal or in Cork. And there was laughter in the room. And I went, Jesus, this isn't too bad at all. It's grand. And I remember that type of attraction. Another man was sitting up at the table one time. They looked down and there was about 10 of us in the room, which normally had about 30. And he says, I was going to talk about humility. But he says, I think I'll wait till there's a bigger meeting. And I like the subtlety and the honesty of the people sharing from their heart honestly what's going on with them, and that when I got with my sponsor doing that fifth step, I was stopped all the time with fear about sharing really how I felt, that honesty, and today I don't mind because it helps me. It helps me, and maybe, just maybe, it might help somebody else, because that's what Bill and Bob are all about, and it's brilliant. And I want to keep my hand in the hand of God. That's basically it. I want God to guide me, and I am being guided every day. I hand my life and my will over to God and I say, please, God, help me today. And I read that, I don't know if any of you know it, it's that set aside prayer. I only recently discovered it, and that lovely little app. There's a little app called AA Everything, and I find it priceless, really helpful. And all the prayers are in there. And there's one called Set Aside Prayer, and I didn't know about it at all. And I love it. I love it because it just says how, H-O-W. Yeah, that how. What is it? Honesty, open-mindedness, and what's the W mean? Maybe somebody knows it.
Willingness, Peter. 5 minutes to go, my friend.
Good stuff. Willingness. So that's it. I am willing, because at the time when I came into AA, I was a broken man, and I became willing to say, look, let this group of drunks help me. Whoever you are, God of my understanding. I have no idea to this day who God of my understanding is, but I understand that God works in mysterious ways and has given me the most incredible life. I've had a lovely journey. I'm semi-retired today. I have my 4 grandchildren living beside me here. I have my daughter, and we can communicate. We're friends. I have a wife that she goes to Al-Anon, and we talk every day about the program of both. And it's wonderful. My life has been incredible. I've built up a very successful business, and I'm semi-retired now from it. I just love my work, so I still do a little bit. I have a garden out there. It's second to none. I just love it. I've got daffodils growing. I've got tulips coming up behind it now, and I have a whole summer to look forward to that. But somebody said at a meeting one day, he says, this program's a bit like snakes and ladders. He says, you can go up the ladder, you can get up there, you're high as a kite, and you're doing brilliant, and next thing something happens and you slide back down that snake. But the secret is stay in the board. And that's what I'm getting. And here I was last week. I've got an electric, automatic lawnmower, and it was pulling around the place, and my hip and my knee went. And it was dragging me around the place, and the pain was excruciating for me. It was horrible. And next thing, I sowed plants, and I put down topsoil, and I did this and that easy stuff. But when it came to digging, I couldn't dig at all. My leg was gone from under me. For the last week, I've been in terrible pain with it. And I sat back and I looked around and I went, Jesus, is this what it's come to getting old like, you know? I'm in my 70s now and is it going to get worse? Yes, it is. But I've got to accept it. My body's wearing out, you know? And thankfully, I have very good friends. I see one of them sitting there now who advised me very, very well what to do. And I'm doing it. I had my scan done and an x-ray done yesterday, and I'm hoping that I don't have to go under the knife. And if I have to go under the knife, well, I have to accept it, the same as I accept my disease. Acceptance is the key, but stay close to God and ask every morning for help and guidance, God, good orderly direction. And going to bed at night, be grateful for having another day. And everything is a gift. Yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery. And today is the present. And that's why they call it a gift. Or is it the other way around? It's a gift. And that's why it's called the present. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. Wonderful share. You know, I identified with you when you said that you went off, you know, and not let people know. When I used to go out Friday night drinking and that, when I was single and that, I used to go Friday night and then someone would say, let's shoot up to London, and we'd shoot up there and come back on Monday. And I'd never let my mum know. She never knew where I was. And I thought it was okay. You know, I thought, well, I'm having a great time. I'm coming home, you know, and then I got married and I started doing it in my marriage. I'd go out on a Friday night, leave my wife at home, and I'd go off with the boys to a party and things like that. And I thought that was okay because I wasn't going with any women. And I'd say to my wife, what's wrong with it? I've not been with any women. And and you also said about when your wife and that left you. When my wife, you know, she came up to me and she said, Mick, I love you very much, but I cannot live with you while you're drinking. And she took her the children and she left. And I was a person that had to be taken off the merry-go-round and that. And when I was in the nut house and that, she used to come down and see me. And then when I left there, she was an Al-Anon, and she started coming home, and then she stayed on the condition that if I took a drink, she'd be gone. And with Al-Anon and AA, me keep going to meetings, her doing her program, that our love grew till we were soulmates, you know. And I was a very lucky man, you know. I keep going to meetings because I know that's where I get my strength from. You know, in the meetings they done on God, you know, and they used to say, if you can't find a God, you can borrow mine, or let's put an O in it and call it God good. And mine is good, orderly, direct, the great outdoors, you know, because I go out in the woods and the fields and that, and I see the beauty and I feel it. And I know it's not all man-made. I know it's made by something stronger than me, and it works for me. Mickey Mack is going to read the promises.
Morning. My name's Mickey. I'm alcoholic, or Martin. Okay. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom, a new happiness. We are not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mickey. Well, I want to thank everyone who's been here and helping me. Matthew, Mark, people who've been doing the screen sharing, and people who've done the readings. And most of all, I'd like to thank Ed's gone. Peter for doing the share, and who you see here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here for the safety of everyone at this meeting. Peter, can you see us out with a serenity prayer?
You will. Thank you, Mick. Appreciate it. God grant us the serenity.
Accept things we cannot
Things we
change.
cannot change.
Courage
Courage to know
Courage
things that shouldn't
and
come back.
wisdom
To know the difference.
Thank you, Peter. Very
And-
nice.
Cheers,
Thanks,
Peter.
Peter. That was a great share. Really enjoyed it.